This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Imagine that there's a group of rambunctious teenagers in this bedroom in your house, and the door is closed, and you're not home, and you don't know what they are doing. So you call your neighbor and you say, "Hey, can you just go check on the kids and see what's going on in there?" So he says, "Sure." And he walks over and he rings the doorbell. And the doorbell, he's like, okay, it sounds pretty good. It's not too loud, it's not too soft. It sounds good. Everything must be good. What the heck? That makes no sense. And we are going to come back to that. So just remember that. That's one reason why I have Fit Logic in the name of our clinic, because, well, we like to do things that make sense and to add life to your years and not just years to your life. Most of you probably know what the thyroid is, but it is located right there in your throat. It's a small butterfly shaped gland right at the base of your neck and below your Adam's apple. And it affects metabolism in every single cell of your body. These are some of the symptoms of low thyroid function, some of the most common ones that we see: cold all the time, especially cold hands and cold feet, tired, fatigued, especially in the afternoon, depressed or low mood, trouble pooping, losing your scalp hair, dry skin, dry scalp, brain fog, mental fogginess, you can't think of things, can't think clearly, and trouble sleeping. But this isn't all the symptoms, but this is a more extensive list. So just take a look at them and think about if you or somebody you know has 3 or more of those symptoms. All right, I'm not going to get into all the science, real sciencey on you today, a little bit, but everything I'm going to discuss is definitely evidence-based. I just want to bring up a fairly recent study in a thyroid journal. This is actually, we're going to come to that in a little bit, but healthcare providers are actually taught and trained to treat TSH and ignore the symptoms that are related to thyroid dysfunction. However, what is very, very clear in the evidence and based on my training and experience is that TSH is actually not a good indication of thyroid function. I will get into treatment options in a few slides, but even when you take something like Synthroid, for those of you who are familiar with what that is, and then your TSH is corrected to normal, it still doesn't help people to really, really feel better. The classification of thyroid disease is unfortunately very arbitrary. It's man-made. The number is just what some group of people picked. You can be very, very symptomatic despite having normal levels, and you'll go get tested and you'll be told everything is normal. TSH is not a good indicator, but it is in there. It's in the evidence. Why is it ignored? I have no idea, but it is. So remember this: house and doorbell. When we test TSH is like the doorbell. It is the thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's the signal from your brain to tell your body, your thyroid, to produce free T4 or T4. And the problem is, though, that might be where testing stops. Oftentimes it stops just at TSH. But if you do get further, it might just be free T4 or total T4. But the T4 must convert into T3. T3 is the active form of thyroid in every cell of your body, and it is the most important marker and not often tested. It's the T3 at the cell level that matters. It's not the TSH. So this is directly from I see a typo in there, but from the Annals of Thyroid Research, which was in 2018, the study that I was referring to earlier. And this is quoted directly from, this is the name of the journal, or the paper is TSH should not be used as a single marker of thyroid function. And within the paper, this is a direct quote from them, the frequent use of TSH alone to screen for thyroid dysfunction should be discontinued. And this is in so many medical journals and articles, and we continue to test TSH. So what about results and lab ranges? If you've had your TSH tested, how many people have actually, I don't know, I can only see 1 or 2 people had their thyroid tested and told that everything was normal. So that happens a lot, and this classification of thyroid disease, like I said, is very arbitrary. So your results, the TSH level is often on the lab range. It might give you 0.2 to 5. And so in order to be diagnosed with hypothyroidism, you must have a TSH of greater than 5. And oftentimes nothing else is looked at. It's like, oh, well, you have hypothyroidism and let's treat you. And then you come in after you've gotten treated and your TSH is now normal, but you still don't feel well. Well, there's a problem with that, because TSH should not be solely relied upon to assess thyroid function. So what about treatment? There is levothyroxine, Synthroid, Levoxyl, Levothyroid. These are all synthetic, and these are only T4. So if you're having problems converting into T3, then you're either not going to feel better or you're going to feel worse. And you really won't feel better until you get some T3 on board. So you could take only T3, but that's not necessarily a good thing either. You need both the combination of T3 and T4. So some people are on a synthetic T4, which, like Synthroid, for example, and also, excuse me, also a synthetic T3, which is called, there's one that's called Cytomel or liothyronine. And even though these 2 separate pills are given, oftentimes, well, for one, you have to have enough T3. So it should be in a ratio of at least 1 to 3. In some studies, that say that T3 doesn't help. That's because they don't give enough. It's like if you have a debilitating migraine headache and you take a baby aspirin and then you say, well, the aspirin didn't work. Well, you didn't take enough, right? That doesn't make any sense. So this one isn't really ideal either. This is another great option, desiccated thyroid, which does come from a pig. NP thyroid, Armour thyroid. NP thyroid is my favorite because it's made in the US. And this is a combination of T4 and T3 together, also T1 and T2, which are metabolically active. But the best treatment, in my opinion, is compounded, especially for people who have any gluten sensitivity whatsoever, which is very common in our country. The commercially available thyroid may contain ingredients like maltodextrin, dextromaltose, and these starches, pre-gelatinized starches, and they all can be derived from wheat, which is gluten, so it could potentially cause issues. So this is the best option for most people, is compounded desiccated thyroid. It's best for the best absorption, and especially for anyone with a gluten sensitivity, and most especially for anybody with celiac disease. So when do you take it? If you're already on it, hopefully you already know these instructions, but I have seen new patients come in who have been prescribed thyroid and did not know that you should take it very first thing in the morning on an empty stomach and wait at least 30 minutes, ideally up to 60 minutes prior to consuming any other supplements, any food, any water's okay. Some people really benefit from taking it twice a day because the T3 has a shorter half-life. And if your body isn't converting well, then you would really benefit from taking it twice a day. So what happens to lab ranges when you start to feel better? Well, your TSH will likely be low. And oftentimes it's so low that it would be considered suppressed. However, there is no evidence to show that that is dangerous whatsoever. In fact, those who have had their thyroid removed, thyroid cancer, are treated by endocrinologists until their TSH is suppressed, and that's the standard treatment, and there's no harm. Your free T4 may be normal, may be high, but your free T3 will almost always be high on the lab range. And remember that standard lab range is based on some statistic of a random population of people who are usually old and sick and not healthy and not optimal. So it's really hard to get away from focusing on the lab ranges, but what's most important is how you feel and some other markers that might show that you have risks for other diseases, but thyroid can help tremendously. And again, TSH should not be relied upon for treatment. So what about this? Can I go into hyperthyroid, or what about thyroid toxicity? Well, the normal free T3 for a young adult is 7, even though the lab range doesn't go up to 7. It usually is maybe 5, but actually no, maybe 4, but I don't pay much attention to what the lab range is because I'd pay more attention to how you're feeling, how people are feeling, and the lab markers are a good guide, but we commonly see levels up to 5 to 10, and people really feel great, and there's not a problem with that. A suppressed TH does not mean you have hyperthyroidism, and it does not mean you have toxicity. Free T3 is responsible for metabolism at the cell level, and it's not TSH and it's not T4. Just again, free T3 is the one responsible for metabolism at the cell level, and that's the one that's really, really important. It is not TSH and it is not T4. Hopefully you'll take one thing away from this webinar. It'll be TSH should not be relied upon to assess thyroid function or treatment. But what about my levels? Again, it's not the level in the blood that's responsible for symptoms or resolution of symptoms, because we are brainwashed. We're brainwashed to believe that it is the level in the blood that's responsible for symptoms. This is just really politics and economics. It's actually attachment of the hormone at the receptor site that is measured and on improvements in symptoms. It also helps to improve blood sugar, inflammation, lipid levels. It can even be a major contributor to reversing diabetes. And by the way, if you want to take one thing to make you fat, it's insulin. And the other thing would be cortisol. Just a little side note in there. Anyways, it will remain attached at the receptor site, even though your blood levels of T3 may fall after 8 to 10 hours, but you still might feel good. So even though the levels might look different, you may still feel good, and that's okay too. So it's not necessarily the level, it's actually the attachment of the receptor site and then what it does inside the cell that really makes a big difference. And that's different for everybody. Some people need much smaller dose and are more sensitive, and others need much higher doses for the effects. So if your symptoms improve and your lipids and blood sugar improve, that's a major clue that it is working, especially if nothing else has worked. And now you take thyroid at the right dose and the right kind of thyroid, and all of these things are improving, then that means it's working. It's not the level in the blood, even though we're brainwashed to think it is. And TSH should not be relied upon. This is all in the medical literature. It's not new. It's been there for many, many years, but it just gets ignored. So here's a summary. TSH is not an indication of thyroid function at the cell level. It should not be relied upon for treatment. It is the most important, free T3 is the most important marker to test in the blood. Symptoms are most important. These are the cold, tired, fatigued, you can't poop, you can't sleep, you can't think clearly, you can't lose weight. These are things that are plaguing our whole country. And who knows, maybe everybody would benefit from thyroid, but most people do. And probably, I would guess about 90+% of the patients that we treat are not diagnosed with hypothyroidism, but they feel tremendously better when they're on the right dose of thyroid. So that leads to the next point. You don't have to fit the box of a diagnosis to get treated and to feel better. And of course, this is 100% evidence based, unlike our current guidelines, which are way behind. Does anybody, well, we're going to move on to Nicole, and she will get into the roots. She'll discuss the impact of where our food comes from and the impact that it has on thyroid function and health. I think, okay. Can everybody see Nicole's screen? And I can't hear anything.
Okay, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me and can you see my screen now?
Yes.
And let me go ahead and can you see the full version of my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Megan. So, as in their introduction, I study crop production and soil health at Texas State University, and this has led me to finding a lot of links between how our food is produced, that's the agriculture, and human health. And so that's what I want to talk about just very briefly today. And I want to present basically three main points here, which is implications for the consumption of industrially processed seed oils, health implications regarding synthetic agricultural chemicals, and the correlation between soil health and nutrient density. So some of these are, these are problems, but on the flip side of the problem are the solutions. So the problem leads us to the solution if we address the root causes of some of these problems. And so I wanted to show you this slide from Diana Rogers. She's a registered dietitian and was a research biochemist. She was talking about meat consumption here, but what I also want to show you, and if we look to history, that really is, important in terms of evidence, in terms of our current health epidemic with chronic diseases. But you can see here that in the 1970s, we consumed not only fewer calories, but we consumed less salad cooking oils, which is in the dark green here, compared to more recent times. And also grains. Our grains have gone up, and I think a lot of us know that our grains are simplified. We're not eating like whole grains in many of our diets. And then also caloric sweeteners have gone up. Interestingly, even though red meat is in the media and gets a lot of attention, red meat consumption is actually down, which is just a side point. But really, really, what I want to talk about here is the salad and cooking oils and grains. So let's move on to that. There's studies that show that the linoleic acid has effects on thyroid function. So if the high intake of linoleic acid, which is found in our seed oils, such as soybean, corn, and sunflower oils, is a primary causative a factor of hypothyroidism. And so from this, we see that we are, as a population, increasing our consumption of these types of seed oils. Also, this excessive intake of these seed oils has been associated with increased inflammation and oxidative stress, and that's something that is a theme throughout many of our chronic diseases, and something that Megan can address even more so. So what are then, this is a problem, what are the solution? The solution would be to focus on diets that include healthy fats from sources like avocados, such as avocado oil and fatty fish, and decrease the amount of consumption that we are having from our, our vegetable oils, our sunflower oils, canola oils, which has become very ubiquitous. Also, from the agriculture side of things, there's a lot of acreage planted to these crops because they are, commodity crops that are good for export. They are industrially processed into various um, processed foods, so they're very ubiquitous in our diet. The other thing that I want to mention here on the flip side, another issue, which was my third main bullet, is the increase in chemicals, particularly herbicides, that are used in the production of the most consumed crops in our country and worldwide. So, interestingly, the big four that we consume are wheat, corn, and rice and potatoes, but we also consume a lot of soy through oils. So if we look at then those big crops and what they have in common, many of them are applied with glyphosate, which the trade name is Roundup. And so there is the invention of using genetically engineered technology um, with the application of glyphosate. You might have heard of, Roundup resistant corn, or even Roundup resistant soybean, or even Roundup resistant cotton. And that's because it is a technology that was developed to basically take these crops, and they're going to be resistant to this Roundup that's sprayed, and it's going to take out all of the weeds. And so it was an invention that was just hailed to make it easier for farmers to grow their crops. But the thing about the glyphosate, which is the name of Roundup's the trade name, glyphosate is synonymous. That's the chemical name, is that it actually is patented as an antimicrobial. And so, what it does is it interferes with our gut microbiome. It interferes with the microbes in our guts, as well as the microbes in the soil. And that's what I study. But the other thing that's really the big takeaway from this slide is when glyphosate started to really be used by farmers in the 1990s, mid 1990s. You see here, what we're looking at here is the glyphosate applied to corn and soy in red. And so you can see that going up drastically from the 1990s when it was approved and came on scene. And that is also in tandem with the percentage of glyphosate soy and corn crops, right? Because a lot of the genetically engineered corn and soy, which is over 90% of the acres planted in our country is genetically engineered. It's not only the genetic engineered seed, but the application of glyphosate goes hand in hand. Now, correlation isn't causation. These are just correlation charts here. But we see in yellow is the incidence of thyroid cancer as well as diabetes on the upper right, renal disease on the lower left, and then urinary bladder cancer on below. But really, we're focusing on the thyroid here. But you can see this basically chronic disease that is diet related, increasing over time, that is correlated with the use of glyphosate in our country. And that needs to be investigated further. And this slide actually was from an MIT professor, Stephanie Seneff, who also has worked with some of these authors, and just another paper showing, this is in the medical literature, paper showing strong correlations between glyphosate usage and chronic disease. Just again, this is, you can do your own, you can go to Google Scholar and look at a lot of these patterns. But what I want to bring it back to again is the thyroid, and I highlighted it here in the last bullet, but back to kind of a theme here with chronic disease, including thyroidism, is the disruption of gut microbes. As I mentioned, Roundup is an antimicrobial, and so it kills weeds by disturbing and killing their microbiome. And so you can imagine the effect that when we eat food that has these herbicide residues, the ramification it has on our own gut microbiome. And we know that the Western diet leads to a less diverse microbiome than the diets of other people throughout the world that are not taking in as much of the processed foods, but then also the foods that might have some of these the pesticide residues. And likewise, this was from papers that have to do with autism, but I see a lot of commonalities here. So, some other things that happen with the interruption of the microbiological mechanisms is, decrease in mitochondrial function. This is our energy source. Thinking about what Megan was saying with thyroidism and lack of energy, and then also just the inhibition of the pituitary release of thyroid stimulating hormone, leading to hypothyroidism. This is a kind of a scary statistic here is moms with hypothyroidism have a fourfold increase of risk to autism in the fetus. So this is really a condition that really needs to be looked at. And just again, in more popular mainstream, glyphosate is now the most used agricultural chemical ever. That was from Newsweek, just to kind of point out that this is something that is ubiquitous in our environment, but it's not only in our crops, but a lot of people use Roundup on their lawns. And if we were to look at turf in terms of acreage, it's actually one of the big three with corn and soybeans in our country. So it's a lot of acreage that is getting this treatment. And I just have a couple more slides here, just some takeaway things to think about in terms of your own diet and consumption, is that the health, and ecological biodiversity, human health and ecological biodiversity go hand in hand. Many of the current health issues that we have are linked to a failure to support a diversity of microbes in our human gut. And you might have heard, if you've worked with Megan or have seen Megan, I'm sure she's talked about this. And the literature says that people who consume at least 30 different plant foods per week have healthier and more diverse gut microbiomes than those who have a very simplified diet. But I would go further to say that also paying a lot of attention to your seed oils, paying attention to the sources of your foods. And this is why also, even though organic foods are not perfect by any means, that has really caught on in terms of people consuming more organic foods to get away from at least the herbicide residues with glyphosate. And then just a little bit more. I love this slide. This is from a soil microbiologist from New Mexico State University, and that plants are no different from us, that they are also outnumbered by their microbial counterpart and depend on them for nutrient acquisition, pathogen protection, and gene regulation. And what this is showing here is the microbiome of a pine sapling. And so you can see the root here, the root in like kind of the darker, the brown, and then this huge microbiome here. If we are using agricultural chemicals that are killing off this microbiome, which is the glyphosate, this has a ramification for the plants, but then also for us. And what do these microorganisms do for us? What does our microbiome do? Is it does all of these things in terms, including immune system, turning off genes that regulate brain development, anxiety, depression, allergic disorders, and also what we could add here is the link with thyroidism. The other thing, and this is my third bullet, which is the ramifications for how we grow food today. So, what is this is also like looking at the problem and then the solution, which is, paying attention to the nutrition of our vegetables. Donald Davis was a professor in chemistry and biochemistry at UT Austin, and he had this seminal work that actually was published in American Smithsonian some years ago. But he was looking at USDA nutritional data from 1950 and 1999 and just saw kind of reliable declines in the amount of protein, calcium, phosphorus, iron, vitamin B12, et cetera, vitamin C over the years. And then this is where the intersection of kind of the work that I do is we have, over the decades, there's been a lot of plant breeding efforts to produce more yield, to produce crops that can withstand long supply chains, that have greater shelf life, that can, for example, genetically be engineered to not be affected by Roundup, for example, these kind of things. But they have led to declines in the nutrient density of our foods, which has, greater ripple effect of ramifications. Now this, and then now, like, fast forwarding to modern times, this is a recent study that came out on soil health and nutrient density, and found that when we look at how crops and livestock are raised, we can see some correlations with more improved soil health or higher soil health relating to more nutrient dense food produced from those fields. And that makes sense. So basically, regenerative farms, which are ones that are like beyond organic, they're trying to add more organic matter back into the soil, have that soil microbiome intact, or improve it, restore it. The authors found that these regenerative farms that do these things that I won't go into, it's agricultural practices, produce crops with higher soil organic matter levels, higher soil health scores, but also higher levels of vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals than the industrial, synthetically fertilized and herbicide treated farms. So I think that this is really an important thing. And also, and I know that we're not really getting into this, but also had more favorable levels of omega-3 to omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. Okay, and then I'm almost done here, just a couple more slides. But basically, the takeaway is that soil health, in highlighted here, soil health is an underappreciated influence on nutrient density. And this is something that is a really big emerging issue in research right now. It's relatively recent. We have a lot more to learn here, but it makes sense. And then this is my last slide, but there's a lot for us to understand in this topic. And even though we may think that we're eating well because we're eating kale or we're eating blueberries, just know that the nutrient density of those crops is tied to how they were grown. So what this slide is showing here is the Bionutrient Institute surveyed crops from 2018 to 2020. And what they did was they looked at the nutrient density of crops across different growing agricultural practices. And they looked at 6 elements. They looked at calcium, iron, potassium, magnesium, zinc, and sulfur, as well as antioxidants and polyphenols. And they found that there was just this great range of these elements and compounds across these crops. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. So paying attention to even how your crops are grown, and maybe there'll be questions about that. But I think the takeaway is when you hear that slogan, like know your farmer or know where your food comes from, this is directly related to this pattern here. But also more and more there's kind of certifications for, that's where kind of the organic certification started, and that being like more healthy is one step in the right direction, but it's not the end all be all, of course. So I know that was kind of just a quick rundown of how agricultural practices lead to nutrient density, lead to diet-related diseases, including thyroidism. And I think with that, I am out of time, so I just want to I'll stop sharing my slides here, and Megan and I can take questions. I believe we have, Megan, do we have 10 minutes for questions?
Yeah, who has the first question? You can just unmute yourself and, okay, so there's one question in the chat. Are there supplements that we recommend for thyroid health? That's a great question. There are some supplements out there for sure. One is actually called Thyroid Support Complex that can help, but truly it depends on how bad you're feeling. If you're just exhausted and there's only so much that supplement is going to do to help you to feel better. And actually, I like this question too, because thyroid is a supplement, unless you don't have a thyroid. If you don't have a thyroid, then it's a replacement. But thyroid hormone, desiccated thyroid hormone, is actually a supplement. It is a prescription, but you're just think about it as supplementing with what your body needs. You do need certain nutrients in order to convert T4 into T3, but you also have an enzyme there that needs to be working properly in order for that to happen. So some of those nutrients are zinc and B vitamins and things like that. You can actually also convert into something called reverse T3, which I didn't mention at all. But reverse T3 is like a brake pedal, and free T3 is like a gas pedal. So if you don't have enough of one of the gas or you have not too much of the brake pedal, then you're going to feel pretty sluggish. And some people just feel like they're living in slow motion. But like what Nicole said, I think the best thing that we can do is pay attention. And not everybody can afford to always buy organic, but there's even more to that. I do encourage you also to check out Beauty Botanicals if you're in the area. They're there at the farmers market on Sundays. And I hope, Christy, did I answer your question? I could go on and on.
Yes, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, great. We have another question. I think this is probably for you, Nicole. Can you recommend a specific grocery or farm in the Austin area that values an organic and regenerative produce and meats?
Okay, yeah. So in the Austin area, so of course, even like HEB is going to have good food, Central Market. Of course, we know Whole Foods has had a history of having a lot of organic food, but so organic is a step in the right direction. At least you can minimize. Studies do show that they still use approved pesticides in organic foods, but organic is a step in the right direction, at least to limit your glyphosate intake. Um, but farmers markets are great because a lot of those farmers are really deeply care about their soil health and even minimizing pesticides across the board. What they're organic, but even the organic standards allow you to use pesticides. So farmers markets are always a great way, and the farmers there will talk to you about their growing practices. You can ask them, do you use chemicals? Do you use pesticides? How do you grow? Do you pay attention to soil health? But back to your question though, you can find good stuff at HEB, even smaller HEBs, but you have to look for it. So there is a new certification coming out called Regenified, and so look for that. That's even going to be better than organic. And then as far as meat too, you can find meat products at the farmers market. So I would again with meat do grass-fed, grass-finished meat.
Okay. Next one is, do you recommend a specific diet for thyroid health? Oh my gosh, this is a great question for Cecily. And what I forgot to mention is that she's going to do her part of this webinar next week, Thursday at the same time. You can use the same link to log on, and she's going to do her part. She's going to talk about Hashimoto's, on autoimmunity, gut health. So I mean, honestly, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free in this country, Christy, that's it's hard to do, and it takes some dedication if you are not used to that. And some people, gluten causes inflammation in everybody every single time we eat it, but in some people, it causes more inflammation than in others. And so what I would recommend actually is an elimination diet. And that's just cutting out, I always recommend at least 6 weeks to cut out completely gluten, soy, dairy, and processed sugars, and see how you feel. You really, really have to pay attention though, because I did this years ago and it was so frustrating because I remember standing in the grocery store thinking, my God, is there nothing without sugar in it? I was just looking for like a pasta, tomato sauce or something. So it's paying attention, and some people do okay with the like Ezekiel bread because it's sprouted grains, but the soy is probably the worst for everything because it's so incredibly processed and it's in sauces and dressings and they use it to cook and fry in restaurants. The soybean oil is absolutely the worst. So, and that I think that goes across the board for general health, but I know that gluten is really like sometimes people can cry over that because it's so hard, right? It's in everything and it's we crave things that have gluten in it, but I do encourage you that if you decide to go gluten free, make make an effort to eat things that are naturally gluten free and not just gluten free cookies and gluten free bread and gluten free pasta because you're really not doing yourself the best favor that you could. Nicole, did you have something to say?
Well, I was just going to say too, it's the glyphosate that's sprayed on corn,
Yes.
wheat, and soy that's causing the inflammation and oxidative stress too. So kind of understanding the roots a little bit more of why we have so much gluten intolerance in this country. That's just been on the rise. And again, linking it to our agricultural practices. So.
Yes, absolutely. Excellent point. Who, what are the benefits of including a functional doctor? Oh my goodness. Well, every healthcare provider is different in the way that they treat, but with functional medicine, we look at the roots, the root cause. So Hashimoto's is autoimmune, and any autoimmunity really is important to treat the gut. We do comprehensive digestive stool analysis. That's really important for you. Um, you want to, and gluten is really important too to eliminate with autoimmunity, especially, I mean, for the reasons that Nicole mentioned. You could go to Europe and you could probably eat gluten and be fine, but but here it's just a disaster. And also making sure that your thyroid function is good in order to for you to feel good. If you're especially if you're tired all the time, you most of the time I see people are like, I'm gaining weight, I can't lose weight because your metabolism is slowed, and then the Hashimoto's can cause things like joint pain, and there's another prescription medication that can help with that it's more natural treatment. But it's your question is what are the benefits? I think it's the number one benefit is that you should feel heard, and your how you're feeling should be addressed in multiple different ways, like mental, spiritual, emotional, physical, not just, oh, here, this is what the lab result says. Here's your medication. See you later. Come back when you have side effects, or if you need a refill. So there's so much more to it than just uh, big pharma, really. Okay, is it possible to find some of those crops like rice, potatoes, wheat, gluten, soybean that haven't been totally altered?
Oh my God.
I don't know what that was. That haven't been totally altered or contaminated with glyphosate or not.
Um, Yeah, so basically the organic certification, the organic national program standards does not allow for glyphosate to be applied to those crops. So that is the advantage of buying organic is that it's not allowed in the production of those crops.
I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has a question. Yes, Jacqueline asked if they can't make the webinar with Cecily, can we send a recording? Yes. Anybody who's here was here today, and if you can't make it next week, then we'll send the recording. We are still trying to figure out how we're going to save it and share it, but everybody here will definitely get notification of that, and yet we'll make sure that you get that, Jacqueline, for sure. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. We know that you have other things that you could be doing, and we really appreciate you being here and listening, and I hope that you got something out of it. Maybe that glyphosate and TSH.
And
All right.
reduce seed oils.
Yes. We are going to have another one next month. We're going to have different topics. We are leaning towards next month's topic being on reflux. But we are, if anybody has any ideas, go ahead and type them in right now, or you can email us. If that topic changes, you'll know we're going to send out a notification, but we are going to do these webinars every month, and we're thinking that they're probably going to be on the third Thursday at this time. We'll just see how it goes. So thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. I'm trying to see.